Move to questions without notice. Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, Labor left hundreds of billions of dollars of debt, supported every dollar we spent during COVID and proposed $80 billion more in spending. Unemployment has now hit a 50-year low and our economy, though, is stronger than the US and the UK, who look certain to go into recession. Prime Minister, Australians are hurting and cost of living is going up and up under your government. Before the election, you had a plan to help. Now you only have excuses. Prime Minister, where is the plan?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his projection in that question. The fact is that the former government has left Australia with $1 trillion of debt.
Members on my left.
It's a number.
They left Australia in a position without any economic strategy going forward, without having an energy policy in spite of 22 efforts. We on this side have been very busy implementing our plans. Our plan for cheaper childcare that's been introduced this week. We'll wait and see if they vote for it. We'll wait and see if they vote for it. Because remember when we announced that in my first budget reply,
Member for Barker.
they opposed removing the cap. They said that was reckless. But then, of course, they did it. But they didn't go down the track of where they needed to do, because they never understood that women's workforce participation is something that can benefit the entire economy, something that leads to growth, that boosts productivity. Just like they didn't understand the support that we had. They sort of tried to jump on for the cheaper medicines but didn't quite get there. We'll wait and see. I don't know if they're voting, if they're supporting our cheaper pharmaceuticals plan. The first reduction in pharmaceuticals since Labor introduced the PBS 75 years ago. The first ever reduction, making an enormous difference to families out there.
Member for Barker will
but of course,
cease
what
interjecting.
they say is we forgot to do it in our first year, our second year, our third year, our fourth year, our fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth. If you just had elected us 4 or 5 times, we would have got around to doing that. But we just didn't get around to doing it. We, of course, brought together business, unions and civil society groups at the Jobs and Skills Summit again to make sure that we work for our common interests. The Leader of the Nats was there. He wasn't going to miss out on that opportunity. But, of course, the Leader of the Opposition showed just how irrelevant he was by refusing to participate, even though the Shadow Treasurer, I think, called for an invite, wanted to go and then boycotted as well. And remember this, they opposed the increase in the minimum wage. They opposed it and said the sky would fall if the minimum wage went up by $1 an hour. That's their record.
Has expired. I give the call to the member for Higgins.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its pledge to return accountability, transparency and integrity to government?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for Higgins. I thank the member for Higgins for her question and for her contribution already that she is making in her short time in this place. I can confidently say the best member for Higgins that this House of Representatives has ever seen. And the legislation that we introduced today is fulfilling yet another commitment. The introduction of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Because quite clearly we do need to restore faith in our political system. We need to make sure that there's transparency, that there's accountability and that there is integrity. We said we would introduce the legislation and we did it today, and it delivers on our promises. We promised broad jurisdiction, and what this legislation does is will allow for the investigation of serious or systemic corruption conduct across the Commonwealth public sector by ministers, parliamentarians, their staff, statutory office holders, employees of all government entities and government contractors. We delivered. We promised that it would be independent, and indeed it will be independent, of government with discretion to commence inquiries into the serious or systemic corruption on its own initiative or respond to referrals. This legislation delivers on that. We promised oversight, and the legislation will be the body will be overseen by a statutory parliamentary joint committee empowered to require the Commission to provide information about its work. This legislation delivers. We promised retrospective powers, and we'll deliver that through this as well. We promised public hearings, and the Commission will have the power to hold public hearings in exceptional circumstances or where it's in the public interest to do so, and it will make the decision. It will make the decision as to whether there'll be public hearings or not. We promised that on findings that it would be empowered to make findings of fact and refer matters to the Director of Public Prosecutions or to the AFP, and we've delivered on that. And we promised procedural fairness, and this is contained in the legislation. Findings, of course, will be subject to judicial review. So this legislation delivers on all of our commitments. We're not the first government to go to an election committee, to a National Integrity Commission, of course. The former government did that. Prior to 2019, they just didn't get around to it. They just didn't get around to even moving the legislation, let alone passing it through the chamber. So we'll wait and see what those opposite do, but this legislation is worthy of support of the entire parliament.
Order. Give a call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister, the Treasurer and the Finance Minister have all failed to rule out increases to taxes on franking credits, negative gearing and superannuation. Given the strength of the economy and the budget confirmed today, will the Prime Minister rule out increasing taxes on hard-working Australians at a time of acute cost of living pressures?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his question, and I can understand why the Treasurer is so happy with life at the moment. So happy. Because they ask questions about taxes.
The member for Hume has asked his question.
See if you can work out what were the two highest taxing governments in the last 30 years. Because, to be fair, it wasn't the former government of which they were a part. They just ran second to the Howard government, which was even more. But of course, the Shadow Treasurer has had a bit to say this week. At the CIS. Now here he is. He gave a speech yesterday promising a back-to-basics approach. And boy, did he get back to basics. Here he is explaining inflation. I'm about to quote him.
The Prime Minister will pause, and I will hear the order. Members on my right, the Treasurer, the Minister for Resources. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr. Speaker. It's a simple question.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. You don't need to restate the question when you raise the point of order. It was a broad question regarding franking credits, other measures, taxes, and would the Prime Minister rule out increases dealing with cost of living? A very broad question. I call the Prime Minister.
We're talking about cost of living. I'm about to quote the Shadow Treasurer about inflation, which has something to do with cost of living. And here's the Shadow Treasurer. Now, I read this overnight, trying to stay awake, reading the Shadow Treasurer's speeches. Now, here it is.
The member for Herbert.
Growing up on a farm, my dad, a farmer, explained in agricultural terms, inflation is more money but the same number of cows. Inflation is more money but the same number of cows. That was his great explanation. The price of a cow goes up along with the price of everything else. I got it straight away and I've never forgotten.
The member for Hume will cease interjecting.
He used to understand cows, but he's better with bull now. He's better with bull now. Because Australians know that those opposite
On my left,
us,
members will cease
left us
interjecting.
with $1 trillion of debt, deficits as far as the eye can see, after having promised way back in 2013, they promised a surplus in their first year and every year then on. That's what they promised. That was the basis of the election.
The Leader of the Nationals.
They produced the mugs, but they never ever produced a surplus. And this shadow treasurer, if that's the best we can do, if that's the best that he can do,
the member for Hume.
Then they really are at the bottom of the barrel.
Order. There's far too much noise in the chamber. Members on my left and right will cease interjecting. I will hear the member for Bean in silence. I call the member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. What are some of the pressures on the budget in October, and how will it start to deal with the economic challenges Australians confront?
Order. The member for Hume will cease interjecting. The member for Hume will cease interjecting, as will the Manager of Opposition Business. I give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I take the interjection from the Shadow Treasurer. It hasn't dawned on him that the $50 billion that was in last year's budget isn't available for either side of the parliament to spend. This really should be obvious to the Shadow Treasurer, but it isn't. I thank the honourable member for his question and for the way that he represents this community here in Canberra. When the parliament next meets, I'll be handing down the October budget on behalf of the new Albanese government. And that budget will be handed down in the context of intensifying global pressures on the economy, pressures on spending here at home and pressure on Australian families as well. And we know it's not the usual thing to deliver a second budget inside a year, but these are not the usual circumstances. And over the past few weeks, we've been levelling with Australians about some of the growing challenges to the economy and to the budget. Some of those challenges are from overseas, like the downturn in global growth, but some of them are homegrown as well, like a decade-long failure to properly invest in skills or in cleaner and cheaper power. Some of these challenges are temporary and others have been building for some time and will take a little while to turn around. So these are the circumstances that we're working with as we put together this budget. And we begin with $1 trillion of gross debt in the budget's saddlebags. And what that means is that not every priority can be funded, not every issue in the economy can be fixed overnight. It means we do have to make difficult decisions, like we have with the fuel excise returning to its normal setting as scheduled in the legislation passed by our predecessors. And it will take more than one budget to clean up the mess that those opposite left and to build the better future that we all want. But the work has begun. It's begun when it comes to trimming wasteful spending. It's begun when it comes to investing in skills and energy and in our broken supply chains. And it's begun when it comes to providing responsible cost of living relief in a way that delivers an economic dividend and doesn't force the Reserve Bank's hand even more. And I wanted to say, Mr Speaker, and those opposite have been asking us about cost of living throughout the course of the week, if those opposite genuinely cared about the cost of living, they'd support our childcare package. And if those opposite really cared about the cost of living, they'd support our tax cut for electric vehicles. And if those opposite really cared about the cost of living, they wouldn't have spent the best part of a decade going after people's wages and working conditions, making it harder for them to make ends meet. Now, Mr Speaker, on Sunday,
the member for Groom.
Mr Speaker, I thought that the Shadow Minister for Finance made a humiliating error on Sunday when she said that those opposite wouldn't have any policies. But now that I see the intellectual horsepower in the Shadow Treasurer's speech and in the questions he asked in this place, I think it's probably for the best.
I give the call to the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the NDIS on behalf of the thousands of NDIS participants and their families in Ryan. Is it the Minister's view that the NDIS is costing too much? Can you confirm that there will be no reduction in funds allocated to the NDIS in October's budget? And for NDIS funds not spent this year, can you confirm if these funds will be retained within the scheme or will they be removed from the scheme?
The call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Ryan for her question on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Obviously, when the Treasurer hands down the October budget, matters about what it contained in the budget will be revealed. But the principles which I think the member is going to is the security of the interests of people in the NDIS. Will they be improved or will there be any question mark over them? And I can assure not just the member for Ryan, but all the members here and the 540,000 people on the scheme and the 270,000 people who work in disability care and the people who love them and care for the participants, that under the Albanese government the scheme will be positive, the participants will be secure. There's no discussion about cutting the funds to the schemes. See, there's been a change of government in May, and now the NDIS participants have got a government who won't introduce independent assessments designed to cut the benefits of people on the scheme. I take the interjection from those offered about bipartisanship. The scheme should be bipartisan, but not at the lowest common denominator of the maladministration of the previous government on the scheme. So let me reassure the member for Ryan. Let me reassure the member for Ryan that NDIS participants are going to benefit from the new board of directors and the new chairman we've announced, Kurt Fernley. For the first time ever, the scheme is going to have a person with lived experience as the chairperson. We've also going to reassure participants, member for Ryan, by the appointment of Graham Innes, former Human Rights Commissioner, Mary Ann Diamond, former President of the World Blind Union, and in a demonstration of the bipartisanship, Labor has reappointed the former Liberal Premier of Victoria, Dennis Napthine, to the board of the scheme, because we just don't talk about bipartisanship, we deliver bipartisanship. I'm also pleased to inform the member for Ryan that we've now appointed a new CEO to the scheme, Rebecca Falkingham, the first woman in the history of the scheme to be the CEO of the scheme. So we look forward to the challenges that we have been confronted with, and we look forward to reassuring participants on the scheme that we will do everything we can to make sure that their experience is excellent. But one thing we can say, and the member for Ryan can take back to her constituents, and I acknowledge the presence of our Green Senator Jordan Steele-John, another supporter of the scheme, that under Labor, participants will be treated fairly. The objectives of the legislation of choice and control will be restored. We will rebuild trust with the scheme, and we look forward to working with people of goodwill from across the House to make the NDIS the best scheme in the world for people with disability.
Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. How will the National Anti-Corruption Commission legislation introduced today restore accountability, transparency and integrity to government?
I'll give the call to the Attorney-General.
I thank the member for Pearce for her question. Today is an important day, not just for this government, but for this parliament and for the nation. Today we introduced to this House the first government bill to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission. The National Anti-Corruption Commission bill delivers on a key election commitment, first made prior to the 2019 election, to establish a powerful and independent anti-corruption body at the federal level, a watchdog with teeth. It is a commitment we've never wavered from, and today we have delivered. The former government, having made their own pledge to introduce a federal anti-corruption body in December 2018, never even got to the stage of introducing a bill. The Commonwealth is the last jurisdiction in this country not to have an anti-corruption commission. It is past time for this to be fixed, and I'm proud the Albanese Labor government will be doing the job. Today's bill is the product of an extraordinary amount of work, and it has been shaped by constructive consultation with experts and with members of both houses. It aims to learn the lessons from existing anti-corruption commissions across the nation, balancing the need for transparency with the need to prevent undue damage to reputation. The ultimate aim of this body, once established, is both to prevent and expose corruption at the federal level. The Australian people sent a clear message at the last election that this is what they want. It is now incumbent on this parliament to deliver. Shortly after introducing the bill this morning, I moved a resolution to establish a select committee of both houses to scrutinise this bill. We welcome that scrutiny and the dialogue which will flow from it, reflecting our genuine desire for this bill to have support across this parliament. There can be no more important task of those elected to this place than maintaining the trust placed in us by the Australian people and keeping our democracy strong. Today's bill is an important part of that task, and I look forward to the support of members across this chamber.
I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the still advertised promise on the Labor Party's website, which says, quote, "We will cut power bills for families and businesses by $275 a year compared to today," end quote. Will power bills for families and businesses drop by $275 a year? And if not, why won't the Prime Minister finally apologise for breaking this promise, a promise he repeated 97 times before the last election, but not once since?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, and I thank the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party for her question, Mr Speaker. And it goes to the issue of the cost of power in this country. And what we know is the cheapest form of new energy is renewables. We know that, and business knows that, and that's why our plan for cheaper, cleaner energy is supported by the Business Council of Australia but opposed by those opposite, supported by the Australian Industry Group but opposed by those opposite, supported by the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry but opposed by those opposite, supported by the Clean Energy Council but opposed by those opposite, supported by businesses, including investor groups, who all understand that Australia has the potential to be a renewable energy superpower. And just as individuals in their electorates, as well as in those represented on this side of the House, know that it makes economic sense to put solar panels on their roofs, not just to protect the environment, but because it lowers people's power bills. You make the capital investment, and then your power bills go down, and therefore it is economically rational to do that. And it is that principle extrapolated across the economy, that will do it.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has asked a question.
We have a very significant announcement by the Queensland Premier, the Queensland Energy Jobs Plan, the biggest pumped hydro scheme in the world, ramping up rooftop solar and batteries, building a supergrid to connect solar, wind, battery and hydrogen generators across the state, creating thousands of jobs in regional Australia. And what
the Prime Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will state the point of order and not restate the question.
Point of order is relevance, Mr Speaker, and the Prime Minister hasn't said 275 once, and the question was very tight.
Resume your seat. Thank you. Resume your seat. The Prime Minister does not need to say any words. He's answering the question. He's being relevant regarding the question, which was about the the Prime Minister's commitment and promises to cut power bills, and I call the Prime Minister.
And the way that you do that, is to manage the change that is occurring in our economy. Those opposite pretended that they were going to have new coal-fired power stations. They pretended that Liddell Power Station was going to be kept open. They used to talk about it, this dispatch box, and then it just disappeared as part of the 22 energy policies they announced but didn't deliver. But of course, not everyone in the coalition is like that, because the coalition government in New South Wales are implementing renewable energy zones, including in New England. But of course, the member for New England said, "I think the whole renewable energy thing is a load of rubbish."
Order.
That's their sophisticated
the Prime
response.
Minister's time has concluded. Order. Members on my left. I give the call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What actions will the Albanese Labor government take, and what actions will the Labor Albanese government reject to ensure Australians can access the benefits of cheaper, cleaner energy?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for Macquarie for a question. And I remember the hundreds of people who came to her renewable energy roundtable in Katoomba in the election campaign, and they know she's a champion for climate change action and renewable energy. And the member asked what we will get on with, and we will get on with the job of deploying renewable energy because it's the cheapest form of energy. And just this morning, I introduced the legislation, the final piece of legislation for offshore wind in Australia. I look forward to making further announcements about jobs to be created and energy to be generated from offshore wind in the Gippsland, the Illawarra, the Hunter, off Portland and off the Indian Ocean off Perth in coming weeks and months. And we will work with the states, and the Prime Minister has referred to the excellent announcement from the Premier of Queensland today. And we'll continue to work with the states, all states, in terms of deployment of renewable energy. And I thank all the state ministers, including the New South Wales Minister, Minister Keane, who said after our recent Energy Ministers meeting it was the most productive ministers meeting of Energy Ministers meeting he'd been to in 4 years, was what the New South Wales Energy Minister said. 4 years, he mentioned, and this was the most productive. But the member also asked me what we will reject. And after deep consideration, we will reject the installation of the most expensive form of energy, and that is nuclear energy. Now,
the Leader of the Nationals.
Mr Speaker, I can report to the House the Ideas factory over there has been whirling away again, and there's been Liberal and National senators and members promoting nuclear energy again today. But they don't have much detail, Mr Speaker. They don't have much detail. They just got a vibe. I feel obliged to assist about what nuclear energy would mean in Australia, and I'm grateful to the group Nuclear Energy for Climate Action, a pro-nuclear group which made a submission and gave evidence to the Senate inquiry into the government's Climate Change Act. And they explained what it would look like. And they told the Senate inquiry that in their analysis we would need 24 gigawatts of nuclear power in Australia. Now, at 300 megawatts of nuclear power plant, which would be a small modular reactor, that means there's 80 nuclear power plants to come. That's one every second MP, Mr Speaker. Put your hand up if you'd like one. There we go. You get a nuclear power plant, and you get a nuclear power plant, and you get a nuclear power plant. There's plenty to go around. And they also told the Senate where they'd go. The mid-north coast. There'd be the big banana and the small nuclear reactor next door. A favourite for the kiddies. In Bowral, Southern Highlands, clipped hedges, the Bradman Museum, and a nuclear reactor for the good people of the Southern Highlands. And I have to inform the member for Whitlam. Mr Speaker, they don't want the detail. They want to have their yellow cake and eat it too. Well, we're not going to let them get away with that. Order. If they want a nuclear policy, they're going to be held accountable for it.
Order. When the House comes to order, members on my left and right, I give the call to the member for Page.
You get a nuclear power plant too.
Minister for
Thank you,
Climate Change.
Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. Did the minister or her husband receive any dividends from shares they held while the minister was in breach of the Prime Minister's Ministerial Code of Conduct?
I give the call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
No.
I give the call to the order. I give the call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The member for Page was heard in silence, so will the member for Macarthur. I'll give the call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its election commitments to make early childhood education more affordable and accessible for Australians to help ease cost of living pressures? Thank you.
Give the call to the Minister for Early Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Macarthur for his question, and I acknowledge the lifelong commitment to children by the member for Macarthur as a paediatrician and for his strong advocacy for early childhood education here in this chamber. And the member for Macarthur, like those on this side of the House, understand that many Australians are doing it tough right now, with cost of living increases right across the board. And we are taking action to ease that pressure on Australian families. Our early childhood education and care reforms, tabled here in Parliament yesterday, are the first step to delivering on our election commitment to make early childhood education and care more affordable. Our plan corrects years of inaction by those opposite, with fees for centre-based care rising by 41% in the last 8 years alone. That high cost of early childhood education puts early childhood education beyond the reach of so many Australian families. And our government wants Australian families to have choice. We want them to have choice, and particularly women to have choice, who are most often the primary caregivers. But at the same time, Mr Speaker, we believe that the main beneficiaries of our reforms will be children, ensuring that Australian children have greater access to the benefits of that really important foundational learning. And our reforms will mean that 1.2 million Australians right across every state and territory will benefit, and that their children will be able to get more access and better access to quality early childhood education and care. But, Mr Speaker, we know that making these reforms possible, we need to undertake some really essential work to recruit, to train and to attract more high-quality early childhood educators to the sector. And this is something that I'm deeply committed to. We're already acting on this. We're bringing forward fee-free TAFE places. We've got the university places to build that pipeline for more workers. We're committed to wage growth, and you won't hear anyone here saying that low wages is a central part of our economic strategy. That's why we successfully argued for a pay rise for the most low-paid workers. And we're working to address the gender pay gap, as well as allowing the Fair Work Act to allow for multi-employer bargaining. National Cabinet has recognised the importance of this work, and we're working with state and territory counterparts through the National Children's Education and Care Workforce Strategy Implementation and Evaluation Plan. Mr Speaker, this government has done in our first few months what our predecessors failed to do over 8 years. And I look forward to continuing this work with the sector and doing what they can.
I give the call to the honourable member for Barara.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Can the Attorney-General inform the House of the decision he announced on the 2nd of September to relax regulatory restrictions with relation to class actions? Does he expect this will lead to more opportunities for class actions being funded by litigation funding businesses?
I give the call to the Attorney-General. Members on my right.
I thank the member for Barara for his question. One of the most extraordinary things about the conduct of the former government during the pandemic was that it found time, extraordinarily, to try to prevent access to justice for people ordinary Australians who are wanting to sue, large corporations, who are wanting to sue large corporations, companies with much deeper pockets than them. And in order to get access to justice, we have class actions. Now,
cease interjecting.
You would think that a government that actually cared about ordinary Australians would not have done what the former government did during the pandemic, would not have found time during the pandemic to engage in the sort of nonsense that the former Treasurer, the former member for Kooyong, engaged in, which included not just the introduction of a requirement for Australian financial services licences for litigation funders, but also included an attack on the continuous disclosure regime, which actually supports the raising of capital for all Australian companies. Now, what an extraordinary thing for a Treasurer of this country to do, but that is one of the things that the former Treasurer engaged in. Another thing, as I've mentioned, was the introduction of an Australian financial services licence requirement for all litigation funders. And the extraordinary thing—
Attorney General will will resume his seat. Members on my right will cease interjecting. I'd like to hear the Manager of Opposition Business in silence on the point of order.
It's a very specific question. Will it lead to more opportunities for class actions being funded by litigation funding businesses?
Thank the Manager. The Attorney-General has provided a lot of context. I ask him to return to that part of the question before he concludes.
We're very happy to restore access to justice for ordinary Australians.
Order. I give the call to the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government easing the cost of living by delivering cheaper medicines to millions of Australians?
Give a call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Cunningham for her question and for her really deep understanding of the importance of those great Labor legacies, Medicare and the PBS, in the health of her community, the community she has the honour of representing in this place right now. And that's why, Mr Speaker, Labor promised at the last election to strengthen Medicare and to cut the cost of medicines, and we are delivering on that promise. Later today, Mr Speaker, I expect that the House will pass our legislation to deliver the biggest cut to the cost of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS. From January 1, millions of Australian patients will see the cost of their medicines cut from $42.50 to just $30. A patient filling 2 scripts every month will save $300 each and every year. Now, that's not just great for household budgets, Mr Speaker, it's also fantastic for the health of the nation, because we know from the ABS that as many as 900,000 Australians each and every year go without a script that their doctor has said is important for their health because they can't afford it. Today, the member for Dobell, the first female pharmacist elected to this parliament ever, spoke about her experience working as a pharmacist with families coming into her pharmacy asking for her advice about which scripts they could go without because they couldn't afford to fill them all. The member for Robertson, an emergency physician working on the Central Coast, talked of his experience of patients presenting to EDs because they couldn't afford to fill their medicine scripts. Australians know, Mr Speaker, how important this bill is, not just for their household budgets, but also for their health. Sharif from Bribie Island wrote to me and talked about her experience about buying medicines but still having difficulty finding the money to buy groceries and to pay her rent. She said she didn't want to have to choose between those essentials in life. She said, "I know this will make a big difference to me and my friends." Grace, a 20-year-old with type 1 diabetes, wrote to me and she said, "I'm so thankful that insulin will be cheaper for me now that I've moved out of home." Mr Speaker, as well as this bill, on Saturday, as early as Saturday on the 1st of October, the cost of more than 2,000 brands of medicine will also come down, delivering another $130 million into the hip pockets of Australian patients. That is delivery. That is delivering on our commitments, Mr Speaker, to strengthen Medicare and to cut the cost of medicines.
Give the call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Congratulations on tabling the National Anti-Corruption Commission bill today. Under this bill, the Commission's hearings will be in private unless the Commissioner decides it's in the public interest and there are exceptional circumstances that justify a public hearing. Why is the exceptional circumstances test necessary when it could lead to protracted legal challenges and hide corruption for longer?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
I thank the member for Indi for her question, and I thank her for the intense engagement that she has shown to this topic from really the day in which she arrived in this parliament, and pursuing the matter through the course of the last parliament with a private member's bill, and making sure that there's been active debate in our country on what an anti-corruption commission should look like. We've brought a bill to the parliament today to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission. I think today is a very good day for this parliament. It's a good day for the nation, and it, as I've already said, honours the government's commitment to legislate a National Anti-Corruption Commission this year. It's the single biggest integrity reform this parliament has seen for decades. Going to the honourable member's question, as she has said, the National Anti-Corruption Commission will have the discretion to hold public hearings in relation to an investigation where the Commission decides that exceptional circumstances justify the holding of the hearing in public, and it is in the public interest to do so. And the key to this is that all of the anti-corruption commissions that have been established in Australia have had to make decisions. Well, first, not all. One of them, in fact, has not got the power to hold public hearings at all, but the others all have to make a discretionary decision as to whether or not to hold a hearing in public. The experience of all of these anti-corruption commissions has been that the overwhelming majority of hearings that they hold are in fact in private, and that's for very good reason. It's because commissions like this have to be concerned with whether or not there would be an unfair prejudice to people's reputation. They have to be concerned with whether or not there would be an unfair prejudice to someone's privacy or indeed to their safety. There's a whole range of factors, and as I mentioned yesterday in the House, there's always a concern about whether exposing a matter in public is going to prejudice forthcoming criminal prosecution or whether it's going to prejudice an existing criminal prosecution. We've given really careful consideration to the question of public hearings,
Order on the point of relevance, the member for Indi.
Yes, it is a point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. I asked the Attorney if this would lead to extended legal proceedings and delay corruption investigations.
I give the call to the Attorney-General.
I was coming to that second part of the honourable member's question, and
members on my left.
Subject to the standing order about not giving legal advice, we've very carefully considered the question of whether or not this discretion vested in the Commissioner might give rise to legal proceedings. We are confident that this won't be a matter that is going to be readily litigated.
Give a call to the member for Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the government responding to the Optus data breach?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Blair for his question. The Optus data breach is of great concern, and I acknowledge the stress and worry that this has caused millions of Australians. When customers hand over their data to companies in Australia, they expect that it will be kept safe. And this kind of data breach should be an absolute wake-up call to corporate Australia. The government has been working with Optus around the clock to obtain the crucial information and evidence needed to conduct a complex criminal investigation led by the AFP in cooperation with the FBI. I spoke to the CEO of Optus on Saturday, having got a brief from the head of the Australian Signals Directorate on Friday night, and I know that Minister O'Neill and other ministers have been working around the clock on this issue. As the government continues to actively monitor risks for those customers impacted by the breach, our message to Australians is to be vigilant, not divulge data to unknown entities and to take advantage of the credit monitoring services. We know that this breach should never have happened, and the government expects Optus to do everything within its means to support affected customers. Clearly, we need better national laws after a decade of inaction to manage the immense amounts of data collected by companies about Australians and clear consequences for when they do not manage it well. We're committed to protecting Australians' personal information and to strengthening privacy laws through the Privacy Act review. Now, those opposite want taxpayers to pay for a problem caused by Optus and their own failures on cybersecurity and privacy regulation. I was surprised to read a media release from their shadow minister saying Labor must provide new passports for Optus victims. Labor. What that means is taxpayers should provide for that. Well, that's not our approach. We believe that Optus should pay, not taxpayers. And Senator Penny Wong, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, has written to the CEO of Optus, Ms Baya Rosmarin, today asking for that, and I table the letter from the Minister for Foreign Affairs to Optus. That is a big difference between us and those opposite somehow attempting to play politics and say that taxpayers should fund this after they sat on a failure to legislate appropriately for 9 long years. Well, we are dealing with this issue. We know that it does need to be dealt with, and we know that this has been an absolute priority for Australians. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.